Module 2. Follow the Yellow Brick Road. Yes, I love that movie. Let's follow a bite of Chick-fil-A sandwich. You know, it has the protein from the chicken, the carbohydrates from the bread, and, well, the mayonnaise, it's fat or lipids. These three, protein, carbohydrate, and fat, are considered macronutrients. The word nutrient means a nutritive substance, something to nourish, support, maintain, and repair. So let's break it all down. Proteins are broken down into peptides, which are broken down into amino acids, which are absorbed at the level of the small intestines into the bloodstream, the cell, and the mitochondria. Now the carbohydrates are broken down into monosaccharides such as glucose, fructose, and galactose, but they're also absorbed at the level of the small intestine and go into the bloodstream, the cell, and the tiny mitochondria. As well as fats are broken down into fatty acids, but they're also absorbed in the level of the small intestine and go into the bloodstream, the cell, and the mitochondria. So you can see that they're all broken down into different things, but they're all absorbed in a similar area and ultimately go to the mitochondria. We know we need to see and smell the food, but let's start with the mouth. Food enters the mouth. 3 pair of salivary glands, parotid, sublingual, and submandibular, release that saliva into the mouth. The saliva lubricates the food as you chew. The saliva aids in swallowing what is now called a bolus, which is the name for the food mixed with the saliva. In the saliva is an enzyme called amylase that assists in the chemical breakdown of the carbohydrates. Carbohydrate digestion starts in the mouth. 2 things happen at once: the chemical breakdown by the enzyme amylase and the mechanical breakdown facilitated by you chewing. The epiglottis and the esophagus. You swallow with the use of numerous muscles so the bolus can go into the oropharynx and slide into the epiglottis, causing it to close. The epiglottis closing protects food from getting into the trachea. This action diverts food from the respiratory tract into the esophagus. The bolus moves through the esophagus due to contractions called peristalsis, and some major mucus is released to help lubricate the process. That bolus traveling through the esophagus takes approximately 6 seconds. So when you swallow something, it just doesn't immediately fall into your stomach. The LES. Before the bolus enters the stomach, it will need to pass through the lower esophageal sphincter, which we affectionately call the LES for short. The LES only opens when you swallow, and it stays open for about 5 seconds after you swallow. It then closes to keep food and digestive enzymes from washing back into the esophagus. The LES is very important when it comes to heartburn and acid reflux. After passing the LES, the bolus enters the stomach proper. Your stomach is located on the left side of your body, just above your waist and behind your ribs. Like the walls of your esophagus, the walls of your stomach are strong and muscular. They contract with enough force to break food into even smaller pieces as glands in the stomach wall release stomach juices, a highly acidic blend of enzymes, hydrochloric acid, and mucus. The stomach juices begin the digestion of proteins into amino acids and fats into fatty acids. The food becomes a soup called chyme, from the word chymos, a Greek word for juice. The stomach's wave-like contractions push this substance along to the small intestine, where your body begins to pull out the nutrients it needs. The stomach tries to maintain a pH between 1.5 and 1.7. The hormone gastrin stimulates the stomach glands to secrete that hydrochloric acid. When the stomach acid reaches a pH of 1.5, the gastrin shuts off in a negative feedback loop. That hydrochloric acid, your stomach is lined with mucus, which is there as a protective barrier designed to prevent the hydrochloric acid from leaking into other parts of your body. This mucus helps you absorb two key nutrients, B12 and iron. The acid in the stomach converts ferric iron from your food to ferrous iron that you can use. Animal proteins contain B12. The hydrochloric acid and pepsid in the stomach cleave the B12 from the protein molecule in the animal protein. Now the B12 can bind to intrinsic factor. Secretions coming from the mucus are the intrinsic factor. The B12 and the intrinsic factor travel as a pair to the small intestine where they are recognized for absorption into the bloodstream, where the intrinsic factor is degraded and the B12 now can cross into the bloodstream. Vegans and vegetarians are advised to take B12 because the only way you can get B12 from eating is through animal proteins. We used to think that stress caused sores in your stomach that don't heal, called ulcers. We now know that prolonged use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, known as NSAIDs, such as aspirin, ibuprofen, Motrin, Advil, naproxen, Aleve, those can interfere with the stomach mucus, removing it and allowing a burn to occur. The stomach releases hydrochloric acid to destroy any bacteria or parasites that may have entered with the bolus. The low acidity is recognized as a line of defense against foodborne pathogens. The stomach produces an enzyme called pepsin. Pepsin begins the digestion or breakdown of proteins contained in the chicken we ate. The chemical breakdown of protein doesn't start until the stomach. Remember that. We have a pyloric sphincter. Now that we have the mixture of the bolus in the stomach and it's combined with the gastric secretions produced by the stomach, and it's called chyme, after about 1 to 3 hours, the chyme exits through the pyloric sphincter. The formation of chyme is what triggers the opening of the pyloric sphincter. Truth be known, the sphincter is never really completely closed. Peristalsis in the stomach allows small amounts of chyme to pass into the small intestines along with water all the time. Passing the pyloric sphincter, the chyme enters the small intestine where food goes in for final breakdown. Protein into amino acids, carbohydrates into glucose and other simple sugars, fats into fatty acids and glycerols. The small intestine is where your nutrition gets absorbed into the bloodstream and transported to the cells. I liked this slide, Shag Me Baby. 90% of what you eat is actually assimilated by little finger-like projections in the small intestine. I'm going to call them a shag rug. It lines your small intestine, and if the shag rug gets squashed, then there are no waving villi. The intestine is damaged then and inflamed. This causes decreased nutrient uptake. The cells are extremely close to one another, known as a tight gap junction, also called occluding junctions or zonula occludens. Zonulin is a small protein that wedges itself between those tight gap junctions, opening the gap. Zonulin creates an opportunity for foreign substances and undigested food to get into the bloodstream. So in leaky gut, the cells in the tight gap junction become inflamed and expand and create more of a loose gap between the cells. Gluten is known to increase the production of zonulin. Here's an image. You can see the tight gap junctions, and then you can see the zonulin in between and how it's caused a gap in between the cells. Just like your esophagus and stomach, muscles line your small intestines to push food along. The small intestine has its own set of digestive juices and enzymes. Alkaline enzymes from the pancreas, called amylases, just like they were in your mouth, help digest carbohydrates. Bile from the liver and gallbladder act as an emulsifier to allow fats to mix with water. Contractions move the chyme the length of the intestines while specialized cells in the intestinal walls grab onto sugars, amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, and minerals, which are sent off into the body. Once the small intestine has squeezed all it can out of the food, the indigestible dietary fiber moves to your large intestine. 70% of our immune system is in the gut lining. There are Peyer's patches, which are lymphoid tissue embedded in the intestinal lining. These are called GALT. It stands for gut-associated lymphoid tissue. Those Peyer's patches manufacture the antibodies that are IgA antibodies. The small intestine is not really so small. The small intestine is about 22 to 23 feet long, while our large intestine is only about 5 feet long. The three areas of a small intestine, the first being a duodenum. It introduces pancreatic enzymes, lipase and bile to our chyme. The lipase and bile chemically break down and digest fats. Bile changes dietary fats into a water-soluble substance that can be transported throughout the bloodstream. There is a tiny bit of chemical fat digestion that occurs in the mouth with the enzyme we talked about earlier, lingual lipase. Most fat digestion happens in the small intestine. An impaired duodenum or an impaired gallbladder equals poor fat digestion. Poor fat digestion can lead to things like SIBO, small intestinal bowel overgrowth. Did you know that coconut oil may not be great for everyone, especially somebody who has an impaired gallbladder or duodenum? Coconut oil is not healthy for everyone. Don't fall prey to the dietary trap of one diet being good for everyone. A ketogenic diet just might not work for you. Then we have the jejunum, with a lining that is specialized for the absorption of the proteins and carbohydrates. Proteins broken down in the stomach by pepsin and the acid peptides now break into amino acids in the jejunum. Carbohydrates continue to be broken down here by enzymes from the pancreas and liver into simple sugars, glucose, fructose, and galactose, that feed the cells and the mitochondria. The main area for absorbing B12 is the ileum. Bile salts and products that are not absorbed by the jejunum are also absorbed here. The wall of the ileum is made up of finger-like villi, the little shag carpet I spoke of earlier. The ileum is also largely responsible for most of your immune system. The waste products move out of the small intestine through the ileocecal valve, where the ileum connects directly to the colon. Sometimes this gets stuck. So I gave you a diagram here where you can see the circle. If you lay down on your back and you push your fingers into that area and hold it and count to 10 or 15 and then release it, that should open the ileocecal valve. Some people are constipated simply because that valve gets slammed shut. The large intestine is designed to reabsorb water and electrolytes from what we call feces into the bloodstream. We expel the remaining feces by way of our rectum and anus. Our food journey is now totally complete. Our nutrients are the compounds in that food that provide us with energy that facilitates repair and growth and helps us carry out different life processes.